In the dead of night, when most small towns are wrapped in a blanket of quiet, some places harbor secrets that refuse to sleep. Tonight, we're taking you deep inside the unsolved case files of a town that has lived in the shadow of terror for decades. A town haunted by a series of brutal crimes that still send shivers down the spine of anyone who dares to whisper about them after dark. Welcome back to Chilling Mysteries. If you think you're ready to stare into the heart of darkness, keep watching, because the truth behind the midnight murders is a story you won't soon forget. Our story begins in the seemingly idyllic community of Coldwater, nestled in the heartland of America. By day, Coldwater was a picture-perfect town: church bells, little league games, neighbors who waved from their porches. But by night, Coldwater transformed. Between 1986 and 1994, 7 residents lost their lives in a series of savage killings that struck only at the witching hour. The killer became known as the Midnight Phantom, and soon, the entire town lived in fear of what the next midnight might bring. The first victim was discovered on a chilly October morning in 1986. Susan Harper, a 28-year-old schoolteacher, was found in her modest home on Maple Street. The scene that greeted local police was nothing short of nightmarish. A carefully staged tableau, with Susan's body arranged in a way that suggested the killer had taken his time. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of robbery, and, most chilling of all, no fingerprints. The only clue left behind was a single, handwritten note placed on her nightstand. It read, "The silence is broken." Coldwater's police chief, Mark Ellison, was new to the job and unprepared for a case of this magnitude. The town hadn't seen a homicide in over 15 years. As news of the murder spread, rumors flourished. Was it a jealous lover? A disgruntled student? Or something more sinister, lurking beneath the surface of this quiet town? For months, the investigation went nowhere. Then, in March of 1987, the killer struck again. This time, the victim was Harold Baines, a retired railroad worker. Just like Susan Harper, Harold was found alone in his home, killed between midnight and 2 a.m. The killer left behind another message, this one scrawled in block letters on the bathroom mirror. "I return when you sleep." The pattern was set. Every few months, another resident would fall victim to the Midnight Phantom's twisted ritual. The victims had little in common: different ages, backgrounds, and social circles. The only link was the time of the murders and the cryptic messages left behind. The killer's notes grew more elaborate, sometimes referencing local folklore, sometimes taunting the police directly. As the body count rose, Coldwater's residents became prisoners of their own homes. Curtains stayed drawn, doors were double-locked, gun sales soared, people stopped trusting each other, and suspicion seeped into every conversation. The local police, overwhelmed and under-resourced, reached out to the state authorities and, eventually, the FBI. But the Midnight Phantom continued to slip through their fingers. One of the FBI's first steps was to bring in a criminal profiler. Agent Linda Carver, who had worked on several high-profile serial murder cases, arrived in Coldwater in the spring of 1988. She quickly recognized the killer's signature: ritualistic staging, personalized notes, and a chilling calm at each crime scene. This, she explained to the local press, was the work of someone who derived pleasure from the fear and confusion he created. The Midnight Phantom wasn't just killing, he was playing a game. But what was the motive? The victims were a cross-section of Coldwater's population. There were no obvious connections, no patterns that made sense. The killer's notes hinted at an intimate knowledge of the town's history, referencing events from decades past, scandals, unsolved crimes, and old family feuds that most residents had long forgotten. One theory emerged. The killer was someone from Coldwater, someone who knew its secrets well. Residents began to eye each other with suspicion. Old grudges resurfaced. Friends turned into enemies. The sense of community that had once defined Coldwater was shattered. In 1989, the killer escalated. The next victim was not killed in their home, but abducted from a public park during a late-night walk. Her body was found 2 days later, arranged in a pattern eerily reminiscent of an old folk tale about a haunting spirit said to wander Coldwater's woods. The killer's note this time was a direct threat. "You chase shadows while I walk in your midst." The FBI launched a massive manhunt. Roadblocks, curfews, and neighborhood patrols became the new normal. But the Midnight Phantom seemed to anticipate every move. Witnesses reported seeing a hooded figure lurking near the crime scenes, but descriptions varied wildly. Some swore it was a man, others claimed it was a woman. The only consistent detail was the hour, always just after midnight. As the investigation dragged on, the emotional toll on the town deepened. Families left, businesses closed, Coldwater became a ghost town as the midnight murders continued. Each anniversary of the first killing brought a fresh wave of dread and speculation. The local press named the killer the Midnight Phantom, a moniker that took on a life of its own. By 1994, the killings abruptly stopped. The final victim, a local journalist named Tom Grady, was discovered in his office, slumped over his desk with a note pinned to his shirt. "You sought the truth, now you have it." Tom's files were missing, along with his tape recorder. Police believed he might have been close to uncovering the killer's identity, but if he had found anything, it was lost forever. For years, the case sat cold. The FBI's files were thick with dead ends, DNA samples that matched no one, fingerprints belonging to no one, and a series of taunting letters that seemed to stop just as suddenly as the murders themselves. New detectives would occasionally comb through the evidence, hoping for a breakthrough, but the Midnight Phantom had vanished without a trace. So what makes this case so haunting, even decades later? For true crime enthusiasts, the midnight murders are the perfect storm of mystery, fear, and frustration. Let's break down some of the theories that continue to fascinate investigators and armchair detectives alike. The first theory is the insider theory, that the killer was someone who lived in Coldwater, or at the very least, someone intimately familiar with its rhythms. The killer's detailed knowledge of residents' routines, the timing of his attacks, and the references in his notes all point to someone who knew the town inside and out. Some suspect a former police officer or perhaps a disgraced town official with a vendetta. But despite hundreds of interviews and background checks, no one was ever charged. Another theory centers around the town's dark history. Coldwater's past is riddled with stories of violence, betrayal, and secrets buried deep. Old-timers recall a series of unsolved disappearances in the 1940s, a school fire in the 1960s, and an alleged cover-up involving a wealthy local family. Could the Midnight Phantom have been taking revenge for a decades-old injustice? Or was the killer inspired by Coldwater's own unsolved mysteries, using them as a twisted blueprint? Then there's the copycat theory. Some criminologists argue that the later murders didn't quite match the signature of the earlier ones. Subtle differences in the way the bodies were arranged, the language of the notes, and even the choice of victims suggest that someone might have been imitating the original killer. If true, this would make the case even harder to solve, a tangle of overlapping motives and identities. DNA evidence was collected from several of the crime scenes, but in the late 1980s and early 1990s, forensic technology was limited. By the time DNA testing became more sophisticated, many of the samples had degraded. The FBI ran the evidence through national databases, but no matches ever turned up. This has led some to speculate that the killer either died, left the country, or was incarcerated for another crime. Over the years, a few suspects have emerged, each with their own strange connections to the case. There was the reclusive handyman who lived near the first two victims, but he had ironclad alibis. A drifter with a history of violence was arrested in another state, but his DNA didn't match. Even Chief Ellison became a target of suspicion, especially after he abruptly resigned in 1995 and left Coldwater for good. But no evidence ever tied him, or anyone else, directly to the murders. One of the most chilling aspects of this case is the way it changed Coldwater forever. Residents who lived through the midnight murders describe a town that lost its innocence. Children grew up with nightmares. Families stopped celebrating Halloween. Every creak of a floorboard, every shadow outside a window, became a potential threat. The killer may have vanished, but the fear he sowed lingers to this day. Survivors and family members of the victims have never given up hope that the case will one day be solved. In recent years, advances in forensic genealogy have cracked cases once thought unsolvable. Some Coldwater residents have submitted their DNA to national databases, hoping for a distant familial match that could finally unmask the Midnight Phantom. But so far, the trail remains cold. Local journalists, following in the footsteps of Tom Grady, have continued to dig into the case. Some believe the answer lies hidden in the town's archives, a misfiled police report, a missing diary, a forgotten photograph. Others think the killer was an outsider who drifted into cold water, committed his crimes, and disappeared without a trace. The Midnight Murders have inspired books, podcasts, and even a controversial documentary. Each new retelling brings a fresh perspective, a new theory, and a renewed sense of urgency. But the core of the mystery remains the same: 7 lives, snuffed out in the dead of night, by a killer who left behind nothing but questions. Why did the killer stop? Did they die, or simply move on to another town? Is the Midnight Phantom still out there, watching as cold water tries to heal? Or is the answer hidden in plain sight, buried beneath years of fear and suspicion? For those drawn to the dark allure of unsolved crimes, the Midnight Murders are more than just a case. They're a window into the heart of human darkness. They remind us that evil can sometimes wear a familiar face, and that some mysteries refuse to be solved, no matter how many years pass. As we close the file on tonight's episode, the question lingers: will cold water ever know peace? Or will the Midnight Phantom's shadow stretch on, haunting the town for generations to come? If you think you have a theory about who the Midnight Phantom really was, or if you grew up in a town like Coldwater, let us know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to Chilling Mysteries for more deep dives into the world's most haunting unsolved crimes. Until next time, stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember, the truth is always lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered.